Welcome back to the Between the Levees podcast. I'm joined today by a man who's been in the industry for quite some time. He recently retired, an executive, I'm sure a storied career. Mr. Mark Knoy, thank you very much for joining me.
Happy to be here, Tim, and look forward to our conversation today.
Thanks a lot. Let's start off where it began. Where were you born, sir?
I was born in LaSalle County, actually in Peru, Illinois, right along the Illinois River. A very young age, moved out to a little rural community, Lowell, Illinois, 4 miles south of Starved Rock Lock and Dam. My dad had married a only child from this little community of 65 people and took our family out there, built a house out in the country, and I was raised out in the country in amongst farmland, LaSalle County, Illinois.
Did you have any siblings?
We did. I have a brother who happens to be a chief engineer over at Marathon, works on their towboats, been in the industry his whole life. And I had 3 sisters. I have all 3 of them at one time or another had something to do in the river industry. My oldest sister, Candy, worked for Eddie Conrad and worked for me and many other people in personnel and supply. And she passed away a couple of years ago. My sister Connie was in fleet dispatching at Pekin and Ottawa for most of her career, and then she moved on to construction. And my youngest sister, Chris, who her husband had a company called Delmar Marine Supply that we put together back in the early days and sold rigging and line to towboats. And she's now out of that business into something else. She lives down in St. Augustine. So at one point we all had, we had the entire family working together in the marine business in the mid 80s.
What did your parents do for a living?
Well, my dad was a towboat pilot, so that's how I got into the industry. He worked on the Illinois River. Actually, in the mid 60s, he was working over at ACBL and brought out the Chicago Trader when it was a new boat. And he would go by, Starved Rock every once in a while, and Lockmaster would call us, and my mom would throw us all in the station wagon. We'd go over and see my dad, for 30 minutes at the lock. And I was fascinated with the whole thing, or maybe I just missed my dad, one of the two, but so I fell in love with that. My mom was a factory worker and pretty busy raising 5 children. So a homemaker, and in her spare time held down a job at the Westinghouse, Westclox manufacturing in Peru. They made the little Big Ben alarm clock.
Okay.
So they both work most of the time.
And how did your father get into towboating?
Well, my dad ran away from home at a young age and ended up at Uniontown Lock and Dam on the Ohio River. And because he was born and raised in Washington County, southern Indiana, around Floyd's Knobs. And, back in those days, it was really common for this. And captain yelled over at this kid on the lock wall, said, "Hey, you looking for a job?" And he said yes. And he got on the boat with Paul Striegel, a long time, career captain in the industry. And so that's how he got involved. And he did that, worked in the engine room and tankerman, went off and served in Korea, came back, got in the wheelhouse, and stayed in the wheelhouse through the early 80s. And then he went ashore with Federal Barge Lines down at Triangle Fleet under the direction of a gentleman by the name of Jeff Kindle.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of goes back to Jeff and I's relationship. We met in 1980.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, because you worked at Convent for a while, you probably know Jeff or know of Jeff. And I'm happy to say I'm going to his retirement dinner in about 2 weeks. He's retiring after 50 years of service in the industry.
Good for him.
So it was a pretty easy segue for me to get into the river business, with my dad being on the boats, and a pretty active harbor service in the grain industry. It was 10 miles away in Ottawa, Illinois. He would go by there and talk to the owner of the little fleet boat that was there back then. So I'm talking in the mid 70s. There really weren't any fleets around the river system. Line boats still nudged in at an elevator and dropped a barge and shifted it around by themselves or tied off their tow. And this guy at Ottawa had a little 400 horsepower boat that he tied up next to the ADM grain elevator, and that was just 10 minutes from my house. So even before I had a driver's license, I would manage to get over there on the weekends and after school. And there wasn't a lot of traffic back in those days, not like what you experience in New Orleans. And so I got an early indoctrination into harbor services and working on towboats while I was going to high school.
Okay. And prior to, I guess, working age, as one of 5 children on a farm, what were you up to growing up?
Well, we were surrounded by farm community. We ourselves didn't have a farm. We lived about a quarter of a mile from my grandma and grandpa, my mom's parents. We ran around out in the woods. I think there were 65 people in this community. There was only about 10 or 12 kids. Half of them were our family, and the Otts and the Coles, and we just explored out in the woods. We lived maybe 500 yards from the Vermilion River, which flows into the Illinois in Peru. So we had the Vermilion River and Bailey Creek, and just out in the woods, just what kids did back in those days. Getting in trouble almost every day, quite frankly, but innocent type trouble back then. Just not coming home on time and things like that. But
Sure.
had a lot of fun. Swam in the rivers and fished and built forts and things that kids do.
Yeah. Were you drawn to anything academically growing up?
Well, yes, I was. I did want to get a good education. Unfortunately, we went to a very small school, 35 kids in my class. But I did get an appointment at Merchant Marine Academy, which was something my dad wanted me to do, was to go to college. And so I got an appointment to the Merchant Marine Academy and went up to the Great Lakes and took the physical. But quite frankly, I needed a job. I needed to make money. We didn't have a lot of money back then. Pilots certainly didn't make what they make today back then. I started working on the river for $13.50 a day. And frankly, I needed the money. My dad was of the mind that when you get out of high school, it's time to move out and start your life, and you're on your own. And so instead of going off to the Merchant Marine Academy, which I wish I would have, I went to Memphis and got my pilot's license on my 19th birthday. By then you had to have an OUTV to run a boat. So I went and got my pilot's license and started making $100 a day. Changed my life. It was a lot of money for a young kid, and opened the doors to a lot of opportunity. And though I missed going to school, things turned out okay. River industry has been very good to my family and my extended family and many friends of mine that I've made over the years. So I did want to go off to school, but frankly, just didn't have a lot of direction and support and knowledge. Didn't know anything about it. Nobody in our family had ever went to college. Didn't know how to go about going to college. So it was a little bit of the blind leading the blind. And I don't know, it seemed like when you needed your dad to be there, he'd be out working on the boat. So
Right.
At any rate, it all worked out okay. Went to school it was about 4 miles away. So we were a little outside of town, but met a girl there, high school with. We got married very young and moved away to a community where we thought we could build a future.
Okay.
But it was always kind of focused on the river industry.
What year would that have been, making $13.50 per day?
Probably about 1975. I would have been 16 years old, which was the minimum age that you could get hired on a towboat. And actually, the Banna family had a couple boats up on the Illinois working for the. Actually, Ingram had the contract at the time to haul the sludge out of Chicago down to Liverpool. And so here's a Southern company, just running a boat between Lamont and Liverpool, Illinois, and trying to get people to go up there and work was really difficult. So I was so close to the river, my dad would call and say, "Hey, so-and-so is looking for a guy. If you're not going to do anything this weekend, you come out and make 2 or 3 days pay." And I mean, that was really something compared to a paper route had making a nickel of paper,
Sure.
So, yeah, and I remember, working for Frankie's dad. He would ride the boat quite a bit, Frank Sr. and his brother. And if you came back after 30 days, you went to $15 and you topped out, I think, at $17.50 a day. So that was probably 75, 76.
Okay.
And because I remember when I got my license, pilots were making $120 a day. That would have been 1978. I was actually driving back from Memphis after just getting my license, and I got a phone call and said, if you can be at Hennepin this afternoon, we got a job for you. People talk about how difficult it is to find people today. That was true in the mid-70s, and throughout my whole career, it's always been difficult to find people, and finding good people is even more difficult than that. I got exposure early on to the industry, loved being out on the boat. That was the best part, traveling around the country for a country kid that had never been anywhere. It was exciting. We had this little guy that, not little guy, but this guy that had this one boat operation in Ottawa. Eventually gave me a truck so I could drive back and forth to work, kind of be on call all the time, because maybe a boat once a day would come through there and have to drop a barge or pick one up. And he'd call and I'd drive an old Chevy pickup truck over there, and we'd go out, meet the boat, drop a barge, pick one up, might get to clean that barge. You kind of did whatever. I mean, there was a pilot that lived in a house trailer on the Fleeting property, and I was the calling deckhand. And he got a second boat, and then he got a contract on the mat sinking unit to provide horsepower on the mat sinking unit. And so I went down the Atchafalaya River one summer. It's probably between my sophomore and junior year. I wasn't much over 16, maybe 7. And gosh, I just really loved that. Went so far away, all the way down into Louisiana, and that I was just mesmerized by the scenery and the people. So yeah, that was probably mid-70s up through 78. I got a license and ran boats on the Illinois River. And then this harbor service in Ottawa had continued to grow. And at the same time, I was dating this girl, and she wasn't too keen on the being gone all the time. So a very unfortunate incident, the harbor service's son got killed in a car wreck. And so he was looking for somebody to come ashore and run the maintenance and repair crew, and I volunteered to do that so I could be home. And so I did that, and then he got an opportunity to buy a harbor service down in Pekin, Illinois. And he said, I'd buy that place if I just had somebody to run it. And I said, I'll go run it for you. And I was just 20 years old. And I said, I'll go down there. We're going to go look at it on Sunday. That's Easter. I said, I don't care. I'll go. And so I went, and he came back, decided to buy it. And my wife and I had only been married for a few months. And we moved to Pekin, Illinois, and we stayed there about 15 years and ran the harbor service in it for him. And then I started up my own harbor service there and brought most of my family together to help run it. And we did that all through the 80s until 94, when I finally went to work for a major barge company down in St. Louis, MEMCO Barge Line.
Okay. What did it take startup capital wise, I guess, back in the 80s? Did you bought a boat for this harbor service you ran?
Well, I had so I went down to run this harbor, and it's so different than what you do in New Orleans. I developed a lot of business in New Orleans later in my career, but up on the Illinois River, it's shallow, narrow, not a lot of current, not a lot of barges really. We had these 600 horsepower boats that were mostly leased from a guy in St. Louis, Kenny Tubbs at Humboldt Marine. And so I worked there at that harbor service and learned all about it, and kind of got sideways with the owner when his kids got out of school. He wanted them to the company, and I didn't think that that was the best plan. So we kind of got sideways, and I left there and started up a competing right next door. And because he was an absent owner, I was able to, I knew all the major players and knew all the customers, all the landowners, and knew a boat owner that would charter us some boats. So I had saved, to answer your question directly, I had saved $17,000. That's what I had. And my dad, in 1984, Federal Barge Line was going to be sold to the Ohio River Company. And so I asked my dad if he wanted to come up and go into business with me. And he said he would. And of course, he knew a lot of people. He'd been in the industry his whole life. And so, we got a couple of people. I remember Joe Cordero was one of them, and Bob Hornbuckle, and Jeff Kindle was very helpful, and some guys in St. Louis. And I remember we went down to St. Louis. We picked up a boat. We brought it up to Pekin, Illinois, and our first customer showed up in a couple of days. This was August of '84, and we grew that to a handful of tugs, and we had 4 or 5 line boats that tramped on the Illinois River. And my dad got sick, and really wanted to give him an opportunity to enjoy life, what little he had left. So we sold the business in 1989 so my dad could retire. And it's difficult with a family business too. All of my siblings were working there, my mom. But at any rate, we all had a successful opportunity there. And we sold that in 1989 to Garvey International, which was a big grain originator out in Kansas. And so they bought me. I stayed on for a couple years, and then Jeff Kindle and I formed a little company over on the 10 Tom, and we gathered up about 80 barges, I think, for a couple years. Ran into the great flood of '93, and that really took about half of what I'd made in the previous 10 years, and I thought that was enough. Let's figure out something to do, and we had already started a family, so I had done lots and lots of work for MEMCO, so it was a good fit. I took my business and my experience and went to work at MEMCO, and that was kind of the start of my career at the bigger barge lines.
And what was your first job there at MEMCO?
Well, because the unique thing that we had is we had roundwood going into Epes, the port of Epes, Alabama. We're gathering up roundwood up off of the Tennessee around Gunnersville. And I had gotten a contract with Mannington Wood Floors along with a business partner. And so we had that business locked up long term, so had that contract. We were also starting to compete with the locals there, Parker and WGN, for other on the 10 Tom and the Black Warrior. And we did that for a couple years, and made the mistake of branching out to the Upper Miss in the Illinois and got caught up in the flood, and didn't turn a wheel up there for 103 days. And just sucked the life out of the business, because you still had ongoing expenses. And I remember one of the folks that you interviewed, Jim Farley, was a good friend of mine, good business acquaintance. At this time, he was over at the Valley Line and subsequently at ACBL, and he helped me with some barges, and the guys at MEMCO, Parsonage and Harry Waddington. And, we worked through it all and ended up starting there as I think it was the Southern Regional Sales Manager was my, and I was in charge of sales in the Southeast, basically the 10 Tom and the Black Warrior, the Upper Tennessee, the East Canal, and kind of broke into the big barge line there, started learning the big barge line way of doing business. And it wasn't too long, I think within a year, got promoted to the head of logistics and dispatch, and within another year or two I was the head of sales and the executive vice president at MEMCO, working with Chris Parsonage.
Okay, and around that time, is that when you started frequenting New Orleans and met some folks down here?
Yeah, MEMCO had a large presence in the Gulf, certainly not as big as The main barge lines back then were like the Valley Line had 1,000 barges, and I think Ohio River Company had 1,500 barges. All of a sudden, ACBL ended up with a couple thousand barges, but there weren't really big barge lines like there are today. So we had 600 barges, and mostly management barges. But when I went to work there, MEMCO had just sold to Electric Fuels Corporation, which was the fuel buying arm of Florida Power. So now switching gears from a management company to a full-blown owner operator, and we put together a plan, the whole enchilada we called it, and we built 1,200 barges and 3 towboats and grew the business significantly over the course of time, I guess 6-7 years there. I did take a year and went to Koch Industries over in Wichita, thinking I was tired of the barge business, but I only lasted 11 months over there, learned a lot, and changed the way I did business and the way we did business at MEMCO. So I left for a year, came back, and when I came back, I was in charge of business development, primarily around the Gulf region. So really got involved right at the time that MEMCO was leaving Triangle and going out on their own. And we bought Convent Fleet up at Convent from, who was that? Jack Jackson, I think, had it at the time. So this is back in the late 90s. And actually, we looked at Frank Morton's business. A lot of, things, seems like in our industry, you have a couple good years every decade, whether you need it or not. He's, been very capital intensive and very cyclical. Beyond seasonal, it's very cyclical as well. So actually, Frank wasn't doing very good back then. And his major customer was ACBL. And we came very close to acquiring Turn Services. That was one of the first major deals I worked on down in the Gulf. Frank was able to hang on and did extremely well for himself. And we bought Convent and how to work up at Darrow as well. Then we got up into Baton Rouge, had a place there. We had bought Randy Eckstein, who had Elmwood Fleet down at Pelican Point, I think it was. Bought the shipyard from Wall, which is now, well, at the time it was, I guess we called it MEMCO Bell Chase. So, did spend a lot of time. I think the first year I came back from Wichita, so 99, I was probably down there 40 weeks. Did a lot down there, and then kind of became responsible for that area of operation. Geez, I every month I'd be down there for probably a week a month for pretty much the rest of my career. I love New Orleans. I love the challenge and the logistics, and the bigger we got, the more difficult it was, and so therefore the more interesting it became, and really grew that business over the remainder of my career. A lot of good people involved in building that. A lot of them are finishing up very successful careers. Terrence Gomez was one of those guys. He ran all the river stuff, and Harry Brock ran the shipyard. Drew Lorette was there. We had a great team. Jeff Kendall was a very important part of that team as well. So just met a lot of great people in the Gulf, and had a great team down there. I loved working in the Gulf.
And this was pre-AEP, right?
It was pre-AEP, but things continued. So MEMCO, actually Florida Power, was sold to what is now Duke, but at the time it was North Carolina Power. And North Carolina Power was a landlocked power company at the time. Did not have any barge service, and Florida Power didn't have any barge service with the exception of the cross Gulf barging, because they could rail it in as well. And so Carolina Power bought MEMCO, but immediately put MEMCO up for sale. They wanted the power units. They didn't want the barge line. The that they closed, they named me executive vice president, and they brought in kind of a placeholder to make sure nobody cleaned out the cabinets, if you will. And over a period of about 11 months, we ended up, interviewing with a lot of people and sold the business to American Electric Power, which was a great fit. They came from a very heavily regulated business, and we were a commercial business, and we combined the two companies and had pretty meaningful growth. I think I was there for 10 years of that, from 01 to 11. We built, I can't remember how many barges, 1,000 barges or better, and 10 new towboats, 10 new 6,000s, explosive growth again in the Gulf. We, endured through Katrina, kind of changed everything in the business for a while, brought about a step change in rates, which made business worth having. And that went on for a good 4 or 5 years. So we had expanded quite a bit and got on the radar screen at AEP, which was good and bad, because in a regulated business, their earnings are pretty darn steady. And, the years that we were doing extremely well, it was a fun place to be. Did that until 2011. Great company to work for.
And in 11, was that the jump to ACBL?
Yeah, I got a phone call out of the blue one day, and of course we had tried to buy ACBL when I was at AEP. AEP River Operations. We tried to buy ACBL, and I think we would have. We just had a change in senior leadership at AEP, and the new guy coming in had no idea what a barge was or why AEP would even own a barge, and so it was just bad timing, quite frankly. And because otherwise, I think we would have bought ACBL, which ultimately it turned around and ACBL bought AEP. But size matters in the barge business, matters a great deal. Scale is so important to the economics of running barge lines today that we can talk about that however much you want to. But yeah, I stayed there until 2011 as president of AEP, and I was also on the fuel barge team at AEP Generation in Columbus as well.
Okay, and then I guess forward in your career, you joined ACBL through retirement, correct?
Yeah, so then I got recruited. ACBL was taken private by Platinum Equity. They had come close to buying another barge line, a smaller one, a much smaller one, entree into the industry, and then they stumbled onto this ACBL one. And they somehow found a guy by the name of Russell Flowers. They attempted to do something with him, and that didn't go through. And just during those conversations, they said, if we were to buy this company, who would you recommend that come over and run it for us? And he gave them my name and a couple other people. And so I got recruited to go over there in 11. And, business was very, and it had been tough for a while. ACBL was having a tough go of it as well. So it was nice to get a breath of fresh air in there, some new money in there. From 11 to 15, I think we spent $300 million fixing up all the boats and adding some new barges, and then we spent a couple hundred more on new barges and some, renewing the tank fleet and building out new harbor boats, etc. And the P opportunity came up. I remember we got down to a couple finalists, and we took a team and camped out in AEP's offices for a week and got the deal done. We thought it was an excellent opportunity to bring in at AEP that we wanted, and they had a really good boat fleet and a fairly new barge fleet. But consolidating two large companies with long histories in business, because AEP had been around since the mid-50s when they bought Oliver Shear's company, and AEP or MEMCO, those guys had been around since the mid-70s. So there was a lot of pride on both sides. And then ACBL, who celebrated their 100th anniversary in I think 2015. So it's difficult to bring those large operating entities together. So we worked on that for a while, but frankly, the market took a severe downturn. Seemed like the day after we closed. I remember we closed on November the 12th because we were scheduled to close on Friday and it was November the 13th. I said, well, let's not poke the bear. Let's at least close on the third, not Friday the 13th. So I remember we closed on November the 12th. It was a Thursday. And I went on vacation the day after we closed. And I was gone for a week, came back, and the whole market had just really cratered on the grain side. And, on the dry cargo side, no matter what you hear, that's what runs that business. And coal makes a limited appearance now and then, but it's really a grain commodity run business. And, hadn't done much better, I guess, from 15 through 20, we had a really tough go of it for a 5-year period there. And, just felt like it was time to bring in a new team and a new leader. And I was frankly wore out. Didn't think I would have been. If it would have been fun, I'd be there today. But it became pretty tough going through some of those things we did. And so I just thought it was time to step away. I got a lot of catching up to do with family. So I put in 43 years and loved every minute of it. But really happy to be retired today and have time to be with my.
Without a doubt. What is a day in the life, I guess, from the 50,000-foot view of a CEO or president of a 4,500 barge company?
Well, I didn't require a lot of sleep, which was a huge benefit for me. I could process information pretty quickly, but typical day, wake up at 4:30, check emails, get a shower, head to the office, get there early. I always got there early. And, as your direct reports come in, so I had 6 direct reports, chat a little bit, what's going on. And, generally by 9 o'clock, you digested what had happened the day before. And so you put out the fire patrols and they go do their thing. And now you start to think a little bit more about what's going on. I had a great team surrounded me. Couldn't have done anything I did without all of those team members. Paul Tobin and Bob Blocker and Patrick Sutton is still there today. Jeff Kindle ran the Gulf for us. So, my job was mainly helping other people execute or implement or develop vision. Most of the time, everybody knows what it is they need to do. You're just trying to help them figure out how to do it. So you'd spend, half of your day, executing your plan and helping other people. And HR today takes up a lot more time than it used to in the past. A lot more training and development. And then, I would spend most of my day really, working on the future. What's the next acquisition? What's the next building program? I spent a lot of time in the industry leading organizations like AWO and Waterways Council and Siemens Church. And, I helped out with a lot of the industry stuff because I felt that was important that our voice be heard. And frankly, I heard Jim talk about this a little bit. Everybody was members, but it took the financial resources of the big guys to get the work done. And then it was always important to have everybody's voice when it came time to deliver that message. So spent a lot of time doing that, developing the business and reading in the business. As I look back, I remember, dozens, if not hundreds of meetings that were so important I couldn't be with my family. I'd have to cancel this or cancel that. And as I sit here today, I can't tell you a single one of those meetings and why it was so important. But at the time, it sure seemed like it was. You certainly have a lot more regulatory issues to deal with today. And, many of our businesses in the industry are still family owned. But being owned by private equity brings a whole nother layer of work that has to be done, talking to your owners, your shareholders. We have public debt, so talking to bankers and lenders on a regular basis. So I would say in the last couple of years I was there, I spent more time with bankers and lawyers than I ever did with river people. And that's what made it a little less fun than I really all that we do out on the river, and that's really what I loved. I never really cared too much for all the other stuff that has to go along with it, but it needs to be done. And you're educating bankers and insurance people and owners on a regular basis when you get to that size of scale financially. We were doing about $1 billion a year in sales, so it was cutting that down to, like, on a daily basis, revenue was right about 3 million, and we were trying to figure out how we spend $1 million on operating cost, $1 million on capital cost, and have $1 million left over to put in our pocket every day. And it's quite a task. And so another part is trying to keep the fairness across all the lines of business and everything that we're doing, because it's important that everybody has the tools and the resources that they need to get the job done. So that's a fair part of that job as well, is just helping people all across the business.
Sure. I'm not sure if it was before retirement or just after, but I believe a few years ago you received an award, an industry award that you, I believe, accepted in New Orleans.
Well, I'm not sure. I've had the great fortune of spending time on many of these committees and projects, and have been awarded a number of times by various industry groups. And it might have been the National Rivers Hall of Fame. I got the River Bell in Paducah. I was really heavily involved in the industry, like in all of that support stuff. It was industry kind of revolves around where you take and run these organizations throughout your career for different periods of time. And I did most of that from the early 2000s to kind of the 2010, 2011. Once I went to ACBL, the time that I had to do a lot of that work just wasn't there. So most of the recognition I got was really kind of when I was at the helm and growing AEP river operations, and helped join. I got a lot of recognition for helping. There was a small handful of people, Burden Lawrence and myself, Barry Palmer, Peter Steffites, that merged Dynamo and Waterways Works into Waterways Council. And I helped bring in Mark 2000 into that group. So I worked extensively, and probably around 2005 doing all of that, got some recognition for that. During that same period of time, we developed the Riverworks Discovery, and gifted that over to the National Rivers Hall of Fame and the Riverboat Museum up at Dubuque. Got some recognition for that. Served on the user board three or four times. So I'm not sure exactly which one you're talking about, but I was happy to do the work. Appreciate the recognition, but there's so many other people that deserve recognition for all of those things that get accomplished. There's a lot of people, carrying that load, and I just happened to for the spear on some of those and got recognized for it. But really, it's all of those teams, a lot of participants get that work done.
Sure. It may have been the Hall of Fame award that I'm remembering. Can you tell me about that? Was that received in New Orleans?
It's kind of embarrassing. I wouldn't remember that, but it's a smaller occasion that's part of the Waterways Council, Waterways Journal, and Informa conference that they have, that symposium they have once a year. But I never felt like I did anything unique that brought that about. And I don't know how I don't know how they pick and choose who they award, but one of the probably proudest things that we did is we developed RiverWorks Discovery, which was a communication, education, training that the industry has really taken to a whole new level now. Very involved in recruiting these days, but very satisfying accomplishment there. I really enjoyed working on the Waterways User Board. Really enjoyed, with the National Waterways Foundation, putting together studies that helped our nation and more importantly, our Congress understand what it is that our industry does. So, I never felt like I did anything special. There's so many people working on these. I don't know why you get the recognition versus another one, but was happy to receive it. And I feel kind of bad now that I don't remember exactly which ones where.
What have you been keeping yourself busy with since retirement?
Well, we've had some logistics issues we've been handling. So when we left St. Louis in 2011 to go to work for ACBL, we lived in Louisville and we moved there as empty nesters. So our youngest son went off to college. And so then we thought, well, this is a good time to do this. And it was only supposed to be 3 or 4 years, and we'd run over to Louisville, do this, and come back to St. Louis. So it didn't quite happen that way. We were in Louisville for 9 years without any of our children, and my wife was extremely lonely after 9 years. And she said, whenever you quit, I want to live by our children, and can't live by all three in 3 different cities. So she really wanted to get close to her daughter, who was getting married and thinking about having a child. So we left Louisville kind of in a hurry in the fall, mainly because as I talked to a realtor, these stories, I talked to a realtor about selling the house and I got to do this, that, and the other. And I'm like, I ain't doing any of that. And a couple guys had said, hey, if you ever move, call me. And I called one of them and they came and bought the house the next day. So he said, we'll buy it if we can have it. I'm like, oh, geez, now we got to move. So we moved to Oklahoma to be close to our daughter. And I always thought that would just be a short-term deal, which it as I got closer, I can be a pretty convincing fella. And I know how to bribe those that are in need. So I bribed my daughter and my youngest son to move to St. Louis. And so that took us a good year to get all of that done. So we settled in here in St. Louis in June. And so since back in St. Louis, I feel my day just, getting reacquainted with my family and all my old friends that are still here, close to the river. Another guy that did a lot of great work for me, still a good friend of mine here in town, Marty Heddle. Marty and I met back in my Utica days when I was working on barges in the Ottawa Harbor. So I find, just filling my day up, I do a little bit of consulting, not much. Some days I wish I had a job, but most days I don't. I do miss the intellectual stimulation. I miss all the people, in the end, that's what was so unique about our industry was the people. And it was such an eclectic group of people from all different parts of the world. And
so, Mark, before we got disconnected, you were telling me about your life since retirement.
yeah, so I was just saying over the course of so I've been retired a little over 2 years, and first year and a half, we made a quick trip to Oklahoma, talked to my daughter and her husband and their first son into moving to St. Louis. And my youngest son and his girlfriend were looking for a new place in Chicago, and we convinced them to move here as well. So over the course of the last 12 months or so, we've been working on getting our family together. And so I spent a lot of time here in St. Louis with my friends and former colleagues. And one of my best friends lives here in town, Marty Heddle, who we've worked together now since the late 70s. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And then we have a our oldest son and his wife and a 2-year-old granddaughter live in California. We've been fixing up a little place that we bought out there, and we try to get out there for the month of January, and then we try to travel out there a month or a week every month. So probably spending as much time as anything catching up with my family, who paid the price of my successful career was at their expense. And I think I was sharing with you earlier about all the important meetings I always had to go to instead of being with my family. And now I can't even think of one of those meetings. So spending a lot of time getting caught up with family and welcoming our first 2 grandchildren into our life as well.
Did your wife work over the years?
My wife was a graduate in finance and economics, and she had a 10-year career during the first 10 years of our marriage. And then we felt like we were financially able and mature enough to have children. So when we had our first child, Mary retired from her career and spent the last 35 years raising our family. We're happy to have her at home and dedicated to raising our family, and also became one of the best salespeople that we had at AEP and ACBL, as they allowed me to take Mary on a lot of my travel. And so we did a lot of that the last 10 years together as well. So she knows quite a few people in the barge business.
Sure. Now, what about your kids? What do they do?
Well, my oldest son always wanted to be in the movies, so he is. He works in post-production on TV shows in LA, and his wife works for Riot Games and runs the US League of Legends series. And then they have a 2-year-old granddaughter, a 2-year-old daughter. My daughter worked full-time, primarily in sales at a couple different major companies, and then she had a baby a year ago, November, and so she's now a full-time mother, homekeeper, and her husband is an entrepreneur and is just now changing paths in his career back to a franchise business in advertising. And my youngest son was an artist as well, and he's been working on his art, and a long-term girlfriend that he has. And they both work in various fields around sales and operations, and trying to figure out how they can get back into maybe the art business. So I don't know where all the artistic stuff came from, but we're happy to have that in our family.
Sure. And I've seen on Facebook, I know you enjoy fishing as often as you can.
Yeah, so right now again, traveling with family, I try to go fishing at least every other month, if not every month. And then I spend a fair amount of time on the Seamen's Church Institute. I'm the vice chair there, getting ready to be the chairman of that organization in the spring of 24. It's a very gratifying piece of work that I'm doing. I'm trying to endow a fund for their ministry on the river, where those fellows will be taken care of into perpetuity, and also expand the offering that we have. So we had 2 full-time chaplains working on the river. We raised enough money here recently. We were able to put another full-time chaplain to work starting today, as a matter of fact. And we hope to close out a $5 million endowment campaign within weeks, if not months, and have 4 full-time chaplains on the river. I've always been near and dear to the mariner. They wouldn't need any of us to be presidents of companies if we didn't have mariners out on the river moving the cargo, up and down and in and out of ports. So I've always had a strong passion to look out for the mariner and help them as best as we can. And so I do spend a fair amount of time on that, and it's been very rewarding. And I got to tell you, the industry has been very supportive as well, as we're really close to $4.5 million of the $5 million being raised, and again, I think we'll close it out here very quickly in Q1. So that's been very satisfying as well.
Do you have any closing thoughts or message for the industry?
Well, I would just say it's a great industry. I think if you're looking for a career, if you happen to be on here just surfing the internet and find something here, it's an industry that can promote quickly and strongly. People care about people in our industry. I think I spent a fair amount of time on the recruitment side, and I don't know where you go, get out of high school, start a job at 35 or 40,000 a year. Within a year, you're in the mid-50s. Within 5 years, with no college debt, you can be running a boat, making $100,000 a year. And by the time you're 30, you can be making $150,000, $200,000 a year with no college debt. And, for the most part, you do have to be gone a month, but the month at home, I used to have these discussions with port captains and guys on the boats. I don't know who works more hours, but I know who gets more hours at home. The guys that work on the boat and get a month off every other month get a heck of a lot more time at home than the guy working 40 hours a week. So I think it's a great industry to get started in, and there's a lot of opportunity today at all levels throughout the industry. The pay has went up considerably over the last few years, and I just think it's a great industry to work in with a lot of great people and unlimited opportunity. So I would encourage anybody that has an interest in our industry to give me a call or Google, barges in the U.S. and you'll come up with a whole list of names of opportunities. I can't think of anybody that's not looking to hire you today.
I do appreciate your time very sincerely.
All right, Tim, thank you. And if there's anything I can ever do for you, feel free to give me a call.
Thanks a lot.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, sir.